In this lesson, we're going to provide an overview of the 11 organ systems. In lecture, we discussed that there is a certain level of organization. Just to review, the lowest level of organization is the chemical level. And if you take all the different chemicals and we put them together, that's going to form cells. Cells, if we put them together, form our tissues. That's the third level of organization. And we discussed that there was 4 primary tissue types. If we take those 4 primary tissue types, we put them together, we now have our organs. Then if we take organs that have similar function, right, they work together, they're going to produce organ systems, right, the 11 different types of organ systems. And then if we take our 11 organ systems and we put them together, we'll have a nice healthy organism, which is the highest level of organization. So this lesson, we want to just go over some of the main features of the organ systems. This way, when we're in class, if I talk about certain organs, you'll know what system it's part of, or if I mention a system, you'll have a general idea as far as what the system does. And it's a very general overview. So the 11 systems we're going to take a look at are going to be the Integumentary System, Skeletal System, the Muscular System. We'll focus mostly on skeletal muscles. Nervous System, Endocrine System. We'll take a look at an overview of the Cardiovascular System, Lymphatic System, Respiratory System, Digestive, Urinary, and then we'll finish up with the reproductive system, both in the male and the female. These two tables that you have here are from the Martini textbook, This image here is actually from Tortora. I'm using 2 different sets of images as we're teaching in different colleges. Some colleges use Martini, some use Tortora, so you'll have the benefit of actually seeing both Martini and Tortora. So the way I broke the notes up is this way. What I'd like you to focus on is the major organs, right? So this would be the anatomy, right? The organs, and then the physiology would be the functions, right? So I just want you to have a general idea for each system what organs belong to that system, right? What's the anatomy? And then what's the function of this system in a very general way? That would be the physiology. So the first system we want to just kind of give an overview of is the integumentary system. This is going to include our skin, our hair, our body hair, our sweat glands, our oil glands, and then our fingernails and toenails, right? So they make up the anatomy of the integumentary system. What's some of the functions of the integumentary system? Well, they include protection, right? If you think about the skin is protecting us from everything in the outside world, bacteria, viruses, chemicals, right? So it's very, very protective. It actually even keeps our substances like water inside of our body. Right? Without our skin, we wouldn't be able to keep our waters and fluids inside. They would leak out. Our integumentary system, we're going to learn, helps to regulate body temperature. So just as an example, if you were to go to the gym today and go on the treadmill and you start to get hot, our sweat glands would turn on, right? And they would help to cool us down. Our cutaneous membrane, which is our skin, has receptors for all types of sensation. So it's going to process sensory information and provide sensory information. We have receptors all throughout our skin for pain, touch, pressure, vibration, hot, cold. Anywhere that we were to touch our skin, we would be able to sense. So it does provide sensory information. We're going to see later in the semester that our skin can produce an important vitamin called vitamin D, which is necessary for calcium levels. And we also can store some adipose, which is fat. If you just want to jot down here, adipose is fat tissue, and that helps to insulate us and keep us warm. All right, so those are the major features I want you to know at this point of the integumentary system. More detail to follow as we progress through the semester. The second organ system is the skeletal system. This includes as far as the anatomy, the bones, all of the cartilage at the ends of the bones, right? That would be between the bones. The ligaments, if you just want to jot down, that hold bone to bone. It connects the bones. Right? Ligaments actually connect our bones. And then the bone marrow is what we're going to see makes our blood cells. Right? So those are the major organs. The physiology, the functions of the skeletal system, that it provides support and protection, right? If you think about our bones, they give us our shape. If we didn't have our bones, we would be like a jellyfish. It also protects, right? The cranial vault up over here protects the brain. The thoracic cage, right? The thorax is going to protect the lungs and the heart. Our pelvic bones over here will protect some of our digestive organs and reproductive organs. Our skeletal system also stores calcium and a bunch of other minerals, all right? So it's a major place that we bank extra calcium. And we're going to see all of our blood cells, red cells, white cells, platelets, they're all formed in our bone. The third organ system is the muscular system. All right, so this is going to, for the most part, include our skeletal muscles. When we say the muscular system, we're talking about the muscles that are on our frame. You'll learn later in the semester there's also cardiac muscle and smooth muscle. We'll talk about those separately. The other major organ include the tendons. If you just want to jot down in your notes here, tendons attach the muscle to the bone, right? So the function of the tendon is to attach muscle to the bone. The function of the muscular system, so again, this would be the physiology now. It's going to provide movement, right? We wouldn't be able to get around if our muscles didn't contract. Our posture, right? The fact that you're able to sit or stand upright has to do with our muscles. It provides protection and support for other tissues. If you think about maybe your abdominal muscles, right? They're holding all your intestines and your stomach, all the stuff that's in your abdominal cavity in place. And our muscles, when they contract, actually give off heat, and that helps to maintain our body temperature. The fourth system is the nervous system. So the major organs here, the major anatomy, include the brain and the spinal cord. You can see those are right here in the middle. We usually call that the central nervous system. And then all these little yellow lines right here, kind of yellowish lines, these are the nerves. They're going to transmit information to and from the brain and the spinal cord. So we call those the peripheral nerves. And then all of our sense organs, like I mentioned before, we have all the different sense organs in our skin, but we also have the eyes, the nose, the mouth, right, the taste buds, that type of thing, the ears. They're all sense organs. Now, the functions of the nervous system include the formation of something called nerve impulses, which we're going to learn later in the semester, more technically are called action potentials. So the nervous system generates these action potentials. Our nervous system responds to stimuli. So as different things are stimulating us, our nervous system will respond to that stimuli. The third dot's really important. Our nervous system coordinates and moderates other organ systems. So what I mean by that, it's a controlling system. Our nervous system helps to control other systems. And finally, it's going to interpret all the sensory information that's coming into contact with you and making some type of sense of the information that's stimulating you. All right, so this is the nervous system. The next system, this one actually works along with the nervous system. It's called the endocrine system. The reason it works along with the nervous system, you'll see it's another system that controls other organ systems. So there's many glands. Here's some of the important ones. You may have even heard of some of these. The pituitary gland, that's in the brain. The thyroid gland, most of us know that's in the neck. The adrenal glands, they sit on our kidneys. The pancreas, right? If you've ever heard of diabetes, sometimes you may know that the pancreas is involved with diabetes. And then the gonads would be the ovaries in the female and the testes in the male. Now, although we think of the ovaries and the testes as reproductive organs, they do produce hormones, so we include them here. And then we'll learn a bunch of different tissues that aren't really glands that produce hormones. The stomach produces hormones. The heart produces hormones. So the tissues that we typically wouldn't think of as a gland, they can also produce hormones. So what's the physiology of the endocrine system? These are going to direct long-term changes in other organ systems. So again, they're having an impact on other organ systems. Our metabolism, right? All of our chemical reactions are actually controlled by the endocrine system. How much we use energy. It controls all of the structural and functional changes during our development, right? If you think about when you were a child, and then all of a sudden you turned 12, 13 years old, and you went through puberty, right? Your whole body changed. Your reproductive system started working differently. You looked differently. You sounded different. All of these things were the result of hormonal changes. The next system is a big one. This is the cardiovascular system. So this includes the heart, all of the blood vessels attached to the heart, and then the blood inside those blood vessels. Right, so those are the major organs. That would be the anatomy. The physiology, the cardiovascular system, is what actually circulates our various blood cells, water, nutrients, right? You may have heard of glucose, right? That's an important one. Any waste products, blood gases, oxygen, and carbon dioxide, and many other substances. We're only scratching the surface here, but they're going to be distributed by the cardiovascular system. The cardiovascular system also controls our acid-base balance, right? So we don't become too acidic. It helps to control the balance of water in our body, right? The water content in our body, and it also helps to control body temperature and distribute heat. Here's an example. If you think about, again, when you went to the gym and you went on the treadmill, not only did your sweat glands turn on to cool you down, but if you look at your skin, the skin actually has more of a pinkish color to it. The reason for that is the blood vessels in your skin, they dilate so that you lose heat from your body. So here's an example of the cardiovascular system working with the integumentary system to cool us down. The next system is the lymphatic system. So here's a bunch of, again, a bunch of different structures that are part of this. We're only scratching the surface. That would include lymph nodes, right? Most of us may be familiar with lymph nodes in your neck or in your axilla, which is the armpit, or the inguinal region, which would be the groin. We have little vessels called lymphatic vessels. They're different than blood vessels. They kind of travel along with the blood vessels, but they're not the same thing. We have a bunch of different cells, B cells, they're actually called lymphocytes, B lymphocytes, T lymphocytes, right? With HIV, you may have heard of T cells, so it's something you may have heard of. Organs such as the spleen, the thymus, our tonsils, these are all part of the lymphatic system. Again, we're just scratching the surface, but the major functions, the major physiology of the lymphatic system is to fight infection and foreign invaders, right? Different diseases and that type of thing. Most of us kind of know that already about the lymphatic system. The one that you may not know is this second dot here. One of the things that happens, we actually leak proteins and plasma, which is water, from our blood capillaries into our tissue spaces, right, around the cells in our body. Eventually, if we didn't recapture that fluid that leaked out of the capillaries, we would have something you may know of called edema. Right? I'm not sure if you've ever heard of it, but edema would be just a swelling of fluids. We need to get rid of that fluid, so the lymph vessels actually absorb that fluid and they bring that fluid back to the bloodstream and return it back to the bloodstream. And that's what I put over here. It returns tissue fluids back to the bloodstream. Excuse me. Otherwise, we would have something called edema, which is just a swelling. That's one of the causes of swelling. The next system, this one you probably know a lot about already just because you're more familiar with it, or most people are commonly familiar with this, is the respiratory system. So the major organs here include these cavities known as nasal cavities. That's the inside of our nose. Other cavities called sinuses, right? They help to humidify air. The pharynx, if you just want to put down, is the throat. The larynx is the voice box. You want to add that. And the trachea is the windpipe. Excuse me. So those are some of the common names: pharynx, throat; larynx, voice box; trachea, windpipe. As we get into the chest, we have smaller tubes called bronchi, and then we get to the lungs where we have these little air sacs called alveoli. If you just want to add, the alveoli are the air sacs. The physiology of the respiratory system, major function is to bring air to the alveoli. This is where gas exchange occurs. Right? So the major thing we want to do is we want to get air filled with oxygen to the alveoli. Now that's going to allow our bloodstream to become oxygenated, right? We want oxygen in the blood, and then also it's going to remove a gas that is kind of a waste product called carbon dioxide, right? You may know it as CO2. The other function is our respiratory system helps produce sounds for communication. That's a big part of the larynx. This is where we call it the voice box. This is where our sounds are produced. The digestive system. Right? So the major anatomy include the teeth, the tongue. Right? The pharynx from the previous slide was the throat. The food tube that brings food from the throat down to the stomach, you're going to call the esophagus. Then we're going to have the stomach. Then there's a small intestine and a large intestine. There's 3 organs also associated with digestive system that aren't part of this tube that the other organs are part of that I just mentioned. We call them accessory organs. So they're involved with digestion, but they're not directly in the digestive tract. They're going to include the liver, the gallbladder, and the pancreas. Right? So they're necessary for digestion. However, they're just not part of this long tube called the digestive tract. So what's the functions of the digestive system, the physiology? Obviously, it's going to process and digest our food for us. It's also going to absorb and conserve water. Water is such a big part of our anatomy and physiology. We're like 2/3 water. So the digestive system makes sure that we have ample amounts of water. It's absorbing the nutrients that we digest, right? Things like sugar and fats and proteins, that type of thing. And it can also act as an energy reserve. We'll learn in chapter 2, or if you've taken chemistry, you'll learn that the liver can store a nutrient called glycogen. The next system is the urinary system. Right? So the anatomy include the 2 kidneys, 2 tubes that bring, you can see them here faintly, 2 tubes that bring the urine from the kidney down to the bladder. They're called the ureters. Then the bladder right behind your pubic bone is going to store the urine. And then the urethra, right when we go to the bathroom, the urethra brings the urine from the bladder to the outside of the body. So those are the major organs. There's not a lot of them. So what's the function? of the urinary system, obviously it's going to cleanse the blood, right? So it's going to excrete waste products from the blood. It works with the digestive system in controlling our water balance to make sure that we have enough water, or not too much or not too little water. It helps to store urine prior to elimination. This is actually describing the function of the bladder. If you just want to jot down here, the job of the bladder really is just to store urine. And this is another system that helps to regulate blood ion concentrations. That things you may have heard of sodium, potassium, chloride. They're going to be, we want those to be in normal amounts inside the blood, so the kidney will help to get rid of excess or conserve if we're deficient in these ions. And then if you just want to jot down here, you may or may not know this, that pH is our acid base balance, right? We don't want to have too much acid, or we don't want to be too alkaline. The urinary system will help to regulate that acid base. The last two systems are the reproductive systems. In the male, this includes the scrotum, right? The scrotum, which houses the testicle or the testes. This is where sperm is going to be made. On top of the testes, there's this comma-shaped set of tubes called the epididymis. This is where sperm is going to mature, we're going to learn. Once sperm leaves the testes, it's going to go through a long tube called the ductus deferentia. You may have heard it as the vas or the vas deferens. There's a few different names for it. This is the tube that brings the sperm from the testes into the male pelvis, and then there's going to mix with some glands called the seminal vesicles and the prostate gland. These are going to produce fluids that combine with the sperm to make something that you may have heard of called semen. And then the semen will be released from the male urethra through the penis right over here, and that would be the last organ. All right, so these are all some of the major male anatomy. So what's the function of the male reproductive system? One of the main things is to produce the sperm cell. Right? Without the sperm cell, we wouldn't be able to procreate. The sperm needs to live in these fluids called the seminal fluids. So these are the fluids that make up the semen. And the male reproductive system also makes up the hormones. We mentioned that when we did the endocrine slide, that the testes will produce testosterone. And the male reproductive system allows for sexual intercourse, right, to procreate. Finally, the last organ system, the 11th one, is the female reproductive system. So this is going to include the two ovaries, the two uterine tubes, right? You may know them more commonly if you want to jot down the fallopian tubes, right? There's a couple different names: oviducts, uterine tubes, fallopian tubes. They're all the same thing. The uterine tubes are going to lead to the uterus, then to the vaginal canal. Then there's two folds of skin, the labia, which help to protect the entrance of the vaginal canal. These are called the labia minora and the labia majora. Similar to the male penis, there's the clitoris, and then to nourish once a baby is born, the mammary glands. Right? So these are all part of the female reproductive system. The physiology, just like in the male reproductive system, to produce the sperm, this is going to produce the female sex cell known as the oocyte, right? Sometimes commonly we call it the egg, right? But the technical term is the oocyte. The female is also going to produce hormones that help to regulate the menstrual cycle, to help regulate the pregnancy. So you may have heard of estrogen, progesterone. There's other ones also, but those are some of the major hormones. The female reproductive system also, once conception takes place, the uterus especially allows the embryo to develop. All right, so until the time of development, we go from an embryo to a fetus. We're then going to deliver the baby. So this is where the reproductive system is going to support that developing embryo, right? And that would be the uterus. Once the baby's born, the mammary glands are obviously going to nourish the newborn infant. And again, just like the male reproductive system, the female reproductive system is designed so that sexual intercourse can take place for procreation. All right, so those are our 11 organ systems.